The Roman legions were renowned for their discipline, organization, and tactical brilliance. Yet among their most formidable weapons was one that made no sound at all: silence. While Roman military prowess is often associated with the thunder of marching boots, the clash of swords, and the roar of battle cries, some of Rome's greatest commanders achieved their most decisive victories through the careful orchestration of absolute quiet. The strategic use of silence allowed Roman armies to move undetected across hostile territories, execute devastating surprise attacks, and manipulate enemy perceptions with a sophistication that remains impressive even by modern standards. The cultural foundation of Roman military discipline. To understand how Roman commanders weaponized silence, we must first appreciate the extraordinary level of discipline that pervaded the Roman military system. Unlike many ancient armies that relied primarily on individual warrior prowess or tribal enthusiasm, the Roman legions were built upon a foundation of collective discipline enforced through rigorous training, strict hierarchy, and severe punishment for infractions. Roman soldiers underwent intense training from the moment they joined the legions. Recruits spent months learning not just combat techniques, but the fundamental principle of subordinating individual impulses to collective command. This training created soldiers capable of extraordinary feats of coordinated action, including the ability to march, maneuver, and even fight in near total silence when circumstances demanded it. The Roman military justice system reinforced this discipline with brutal efficiency. Punishments for breaking silence during covert operations could be severe, ranging from flogging to the dreaded decimation, where 1 in every 10 soldiers in a disgraced unit would be executed by their comrades. While decimation was rare and reserved for extreme cases of cowardice or mutiny, its existence loomed in the collective consciousness of every legionnaire, creating a powerful deterrent against any breach of discipline. This cultural framework meant that when a Roman commander ordered silence, it was not a suggestion or a hopeful request. It was an absolute command backed by the full weight of military law and tradition. Soldiers understood that maintaining operational silence was not merely about tactical advantage, but about survival, both for themselves and their brothers in arms. Engineering. Silence, the logistics of silent movement. Moving thousands of armed men through varied terrain without detection required more than simple discipline. It demanded careful planning, specialized equipment, and meticulous attention to detail. Roman commanders and their staff officers understood that silence was as much an engineering problem as it was a matter of willpower. The first consideration was equipment. Roman soldiers typically carried substantial gear, including armor, weapons, tools, and personal effects. Left unchecked, a marching column of legionnaires would create a cacophony of clanking metal, creaking leather, and rattling equipment audible from considerable distances. Before a silent march, commanders would order soldiers to secure all loose items. Metal fittings might be wrapped in cloth or leather to prevent contact. Shields could be carried in specific positions to minimize noise. Even the caligae, the characteristic hobnailed military sandals, might be temporarily replaced with softer footwear or wrapped to muffle their distinctive sound on hard surfaces. The Romans also paid careful attention to terrain selection. Scout units, often composed of the most experienced and trusted soldiers, would survey potential routes days or even weeks in advance. They sought paths that would naturally dampen sound, soft soil rather than rocky ground, routes through dense vegetation that would absorb noise, valleys that would contain sound rather than carry it to enemy positions. Rivers and streams were particularly valuable, as the natural sound of flowing water could mask the movements of even large formations. Timing was equally crucial. Roman commanders often scheduled silent movements to coincide with natural phenomena that would provide acoustic cover. Windy nights were ideal, as the sound of wind through trees and rustling vegetation could disguise the subtle sounds of an army's passage. Rain provided even better cover, though it presented its own challenges with slippery terrain and reduced visibility. The hours just before dawn, when human vigilance naturally wanes and ambient sounds are at their lowest, were considered optimal for the final approach to enemy positions. The physical organization of the march itself was carefully calculated. Rather than the usual dense columns that maximized road usage, silent marches might employ thinner, more dispersed formations that reduced the concentration of noise. Spacing between individual soldiers could be increased to prevent the cumulative effect of hundreds of men moving in lockstep. Command and control during such movements relied heavily on visual signals and prearranged protocols, as verbal orders were obviously impossible. Case study: Scipio Africanus and the capture of New Carthage. One of the most spectacular examples of Rome's mastery of silent military movement occurred during the Second Punic War under the command of Publius Cornelius Scipio, later known as Scipio Africanus. In 209 BCE, Scipio was appointed to command Roman forces in Hispania, where Carthaginian general Hasdrubal held significant territory and posed a continuing threat to Roman interests. Scipio's target was New Carthage, the principal Carthaginian base in the region. The city was formidably defended, surrounded by walls, protected by a garrison of approximately 1,000 soldiers, and further secured by its position on a peninsula, with a lagoon on one side and the sea on the other. Conventional military wisdom suggested that such a stronghold would require a lengthy siege or overwhelming force to capture. But Scipio had gathered crucial intelligence from local fishermen and scouts about the lagoon's behavior. Each evening, as the tide receded and winds shifted, a portion of the lagoon became shallow enough to wade through. This information formed the basis of an audacious plan that required perfect timing and absolute silence. Scipio's army approached New Carthage openly, making no attempt to hide their arrival. This was deliberate misdirection. While the defenders focused on the obvious threat of the Roman army assembling for a conventional assault, Scipio prepared a secondary force of 500 picked men for the true attack. These soldiers were selected for their discipline, swimming ability, and capacity to follow orders under extreme pressure. As Scipio launched a conspicuous frontal assault on the city's main gates, creating tremendous noise and drawing defenders to that sector, his special force moved into position by the lagoon. Historical accounts emphasize the extraordinary discipline these men displayed. They waited, weapons secured, speaking not a word, as the sun set and the waters gradually receded. Local guides who understood the lagoon's patterns intimately monitored the water level. When the moment came, the 500 moved forward in near total silence through the shallow water. The sound of the frontal assault masked what little noise they made. The defenders, focused entirely on the gates where Roman battering rams thundered and soldiers shouted war cries, never noticed the figures emerging from the lagoon behind them. By the time the infiltrators had scaled the undefended walls and opened gates from within, the city's fate was sealed. Scipio's capture of New Carthage demonstrated multiple sophisticated uses of silence as a tactical weapon. The silent approach through the lagoon was the operation's centerpiece, but equally important was his use of noise as a distraction. The conspicuous assault created a soundscape that enemy commanders expected, making them psychologically blind to threats from unexpected quarters. This manipulation of auditory perception proved as valuable as physical stealth. Julius Caesar's silent marches in Gaul. Julius Caesar, perhaps Rome's most celebrated military commander, repeatedly demonstrated mastery of silent movement during his campaigns in Gaul. His commentaries on the Gallic Wars, while written partly as political propaganda, nonetheless contain valuable information about his tactical methods, including several instances where silence played a crucial role. During the campaign against the Nervi in 57 BCE, Caesar employed silent movement to recover from what could have been a catastrophic mistake. The Nervi, considered among the most warlike of the Gallic tribes, had observed Roman habits during previous encounters and understood their standard marching and camp-building procedures. When Caesar's army approached their territory, the Nervi prepared an ambush, hiding a substantial force in forests near the river Sabis. As the Romans began establishing their camp according to standard procedures, the Nervi launched a devastating surprise attack that caught several legions unprepared. The battle quickly turned desperate, with Roman formations breaking under the sudden assault. Caesar himself had to grab a shield and fight in the front lines to stabilize the situation. What turned the tide was the arrival of the 10th Legion, Caesar's most experienced and trusted unit, which had been serving as the rear guard. Hearing sounds of battle ahead, the legion's commanders had immediately force-marched towards the fighting. Critically, as they approached, they maintained strict march discipline and silence, allowing them to assess the battlefield situation before committing. The Nervi, believing they had broken the Roman army and engaged with pursuing scattered legionnaires throughout the camp, were completely unaware of the 10th Legion's approach. When the fresh Roman formation suddenly appeared on their flank in perfect battle order, the psychological impact was devastating. The Nervi suddenly found themselves attacked from an unexpected direction by soldiers who seemed to materialize from nowhere. The resulting confusion allowed Caesar to rally his other legions and eventually win the battle, though at terrible cost. Caesar's winter crossing of the Alps in 58-57 BCE to deal with the Helvetii migration provides another example. Conventional wisdom held that the Alpine passes were impassable during winter, and the Helvetii believed themselves safe from Roman interference during the cold months. Caesar, learning that the Helvetii planned to cross through Roman territory in spring, decided to upset their timeline by crossing the mountains during winter. The march required extraordinary hardship from his soldiers, who had to navigate snow-covered passes in conditions that could easily kill stragglers or those who drew attention to their presence. Caesar ordered absolute silence during critical portions of the march, particularly when moving through territories where hostile tribes might be watching. The army moved in compact formations during daylight hours when observation was most likely, then dispersed into smaller units at night for warmth and rest. Historical accounts suggest that Caesar employed a rotating system where different cohorts took turns at the most dangerous point positions, ensuring that fresh troops were always at the front and rear where vigilance was most critical. Officers moved along the column constantly, enforcing silence without verbal commands through gestures and predetermined signals. Any soldier who compromised operational security through noise would be immediately removed from the formation and might face disciplinary action after the operation concluded. The silent winter march succeeded brilliantly. When Caesar's army emerged from the Alps ahead of schedule, they appeared to the Helvetii as if by magic. The psychological impact of this seemingly impossible feat, combined with the Romans' sudden presence in blocking positions, fundamentally altered the strategic situation. The Helvetii, who had assumed they had months to prepare, suddenly faced a Roman army in battle-ready positions. This temporal and spatial manipulation, enabled by the silent march, gave Caesar negotiating leverage and eventually contributed to Roman victory. Night operations and the mastery of darkness. Roman commanders understood that darkness provided natural cover for movement, but also presented unique challenges for maintaining unit cohesion and preventing friendly fire incidents. Silent night operations required even more sophisticated planning than daylight maneuvers. the Roman military developed specific protocols for night movements. Soldiers would be briefed on the route, objectives, and formations before darkness fell. Once operations commenced, communication relied entirely on predetermined signals, specific patterns of hand grips for close quarters, light signals using shuttered lanterns for longer distances, and physical contact to maintain formation coherence. One effective technique involved soldiers maintaining physical contact with the man in front through a system of connected straps or by touching the scabbard of the soldier ahead. This allowed formations to move through complete darkness while maintaining unit integrity without verbal communication. Officers could navigate using celestial navigation or following guides who had memorized the terrain. The Romans also exploited enemy expectations about nighttime activity. Ancient armies generally avoided night combat due to the high risk of confusion and friendly fire. By training extensively for night operations, Roman commanders could execute maneuvers that opponents would consider too risky to attempt, creating opportunities for surprise attacks when enemy vigilance was lowest. During sieges, Roman engineers often conducted excavation work at night to dig tunnels under enemy walls. These operations required extraordinary silence, as defenders would sometimes attempt to detect mining operations by placing water-filled vessels on the ground to sense vibrations or by listening for underground sounds. Roman miners worked with muffled tools, removed dirt in cloth bags to prevent the sound of spilling earth, and maintained absolute quiet even while laboring in dark, cramped tunnels for hours. Countering enemy scouts and intelligence networks. Maintaining silent army movements required more than controlling your own soldiers' noise. Roman commanders had to neutralize enemy intelligence gathering capabilities through what we might now call counterintelligence operations. Before initiating a major covert movement, Roman commanders would deploy specialized units to systematically eliminate enemy scouts and observation posts. These operations combined stealth with ruthless efficiency. Small teams of specially trained soldiers, often veterans with hunting or tracking experience, would infiltrate ahead of the main force to locate and neutralize enemy watchers. These advance teams operated under extreme discipline. They couldn't afford to alert enemies through noise of combat or allow scouts to escape and report Roman movements. Methods included silent approaches, followed by immediate close-quarters killing, the use of nets or snares to capture scouts alive for interrogation, or in some cases, simply avoiding detection until the scout could be isolated from any means of communication. Roman intelligence services also employed deception operations to feed false information to enemy spies. If a major silent movement was planned toward the east, Roman commanders might conspicuously prepare for operations in the west, complete with noisy demonstrations, false supply movements, and deliberately leaked secret plans. This misdirection could cause enemies to position their scouts and listening posts in entirely wrong locations, making the actual silent movement even more effective. The Romans also understood that local populations could serve as inadvertent intelligence sources for enemies. When operating in hostile territory, commanders sometimes imposed strict controls on interactions between soldiers and civilians. In extreme cases, Roman armies might temporarily cordon off entire regions, preventing any civilian movement that could alert enemies to Roman presence or intentions. While brutal, these measures reflected the Romans' sophisticated understanding that successful silent operations required controlling information flow at every level. The psychological dimensions of silent warfare. Beyond its practical tactical advantages, the Romans weaponized silence for psychological effect. The sudden appearance of a Roman army where none was expected could break enemy morale more effectively than any frontal assault. Ancient warriors generally found comfort in the familiar sounds of war. The tramping of marching feet, warning of an army's approach, scouts' reports providing advance notice of enemy movements. the escalating cacophony as opposing forces drew near. These sounds, while threatening, were psychologically manageable because they were expected and understood. Soldiers could prepare mentally for the coming battle. Silent approaches stripped away these psychological comforts. An enemy sentry peering into darkness, straining to hear some warning of approaching danger, experiencing nothing but silence, would be in a state of maximum psychological stress. When Roman soldiers finally revealed themselves, often at very close range, the shock could be overwhelming. Opponents might freeze, flee in panic, or surrender rather than fight, having been psychologically defeated before combat even began. Roman commanders cultivated reputations for these silent appearances. Stories of Roman armies materializing from nowhere spread throughout the Mediterranean world, creating a mystique that worked in Rome's favor. Enemies facing Rome knew that silence from their scouts might mean nothing, or might mean thousands of disciplined soldiers were approaching unseen. This uncertainty was itself a weapon that could influence enemy decision-making and morale. The Romans also used enforced silence as a form of discipline and psychological conditioning for their own troops. Soldiers who could march for hours in absolute silence, suppressing natural human impulses to talk, complain, or make noise, developed an enhanced sense of discipline and collective identity. The shared experience of silent movement under dangerous conditions bonded units together and reinforced the cultural values of duty and obedience that underpinned Roman military effectiveness. Training and preparation for silent operations. The Roman military training system incorporated preparation for silent operations, from basic recruit training through advanced unit exercises. This ensured that the capability for silent movement was maintained throughout the army, not just in elite units. New recruits learned basic silence discipline alongside weapon handling and formation drill. Training exercises would include night marches where talking was forbidden, practice in securing equipment to prevent noise, and instruction in the hand signals and visual communication systems used during covert operations. Trainers would deliberately introduce distractions and temptations to speak, testing recruits' discipline and identifying those who might compromise operations. More advanced training occurred at the cohort and legion level. Units would conduct extended exercises simulating actual operational conditions, night marches through difficult terrain, approaches to mock enemy positions, coordinated attacks requiring multiple formations to move silently and synchronize their actions without verbal communication. These exercises could last for days, conditioning soldiers to the physical and psychological demands of prolonged silence under stress. Centurions, the backbone of Roman military leadership, received specific training in maintaining discipline during covert operations. They learned to enforce silence through personal example and nonverbal communication, to identify and address potential security risks before they compromised operations, and to make tactical decisions without the usual ability to verbally coordinate with neighboring units or higher commanders. The Roman military also maintained institutional knowledge through written records and oral tradition. Successful silent operations would be analyzed and documented, with lessons learned incorporated into training protocols. Commanders who developed effective techniques for silent movement would share their methods with peers and successors, creating an evolving body of tactical knowledge that accumulated over generations. Technology and innovation in pursuit of silence. While Roman military technology is often associated with siege weapons, fortifications, and armor, the Romans also developed innovations specifically designed to reduce noise and enable silent operations. Specialized equipment included modified sandals with leather soles instead of hobnails for scouts and infiltration units. These sacrificed some durability, but allowed much quieter movement. Romans also developed wrapping materials treated with oils or waxes that would prevent squeaking when used to secure metal components. Weapons sheaths might be lined with wool or felt to prevent the distinctive ring of a sword being drawn. Signal systems evolved to enable command and control without sound. Beyond simple hand signals, the Romans developed more sophisticated visual communication methods, including shuttered lanterns, that could transmit coded messages over distance at night, colored flags or cloths for daylight signaling, and even systems of mirrors for long-range communication in favorable conditions. These technologies allowed coordinated movement and tactical adjustments without verbal orders. Roman engineering skills extended to acoustic considerations in camp construction and siege operations. When establishing camps in enemy territory, engineers might select locations with natural acoustic barriers, such as hills or dense vegetation between the camp and enemy positions. During siege operations, Roman engineers understood how to conduct excavation and construction work in ways that minimized sound transmission to defenders. The Romans also studied and exploited acoustic geography. Just as they were masters of terrain analysis for tactical purposes, they understood how sound behaved in different environments. Valleys could channel sound over great distances, while broken terrain might contain it. Forest types affected sound absorption differently, with dense hardwood forests offering more acoustic dampening than open pine stands. This knowledge informed route selection and operational planning. Command and control challenges. Maintaining effective command and control during silent operations presented significant challenges that Roman commanders addressed through various methods. Without verbal orders, messengers, or trumpet signals, commanders needed alternative means to direct their forces. Pre-operation planning became even more critical for silent movements. Commanders would conduct detailed briefings, sometimes using terrain models or maps drawn in sand, ensuring every officer understood the complete operation plan. Individual units received specific instructions about routes, timing, formations, and objectives. Contingency plans for various scenarios would be discussed and memorized. During operations, command relied heavily on initiative and pre-authorized decision-making authority. Junior officers and even individual soldiers might need to make tactical decisions based on the situation they encountered, trusting that these decisions would align with the commander's intent because of shared understanding developed through training and briefing. Physical positioning of commanders also changed during silent operations. Rather than directing from a central command post with good overview but limited tactical control, commanders might position themselves within the moving formation, where they could directly observe and influence the operation's progress through personal presence and example. Senior commanders sometimes employed small groups of trusted messengers who could move quickly and silently between units to coordinate actions or relay critical information. These messengers, often selected from among the most experienced soldiers, understood the importance of their role and the potential consequences of failure. They would memorize messages rather than carry written orders that could be intercepted, and would be prepared to destroy sensitive information if capture seemed imminent. Silent retreats and strategic withdrawal. While silent advances and attacks garnered more glory, Roman commanders also used silence during retreats and withdrawals. A silent retreat from an untenable position could save an army from destruction, allowing forces to escape encirclement or break contact with a superior enemy. Executing a silent withdrawal presented unique challenges. Unlike an advance where soldiers moved toward an objective with aggressive intent, a retreat required soldiers to suppress natural fear and maintain discipline while moving away from danger. The temptation to run, make noise, or lose formation cohesion was considerably higher. Roman commanders employed several techniques to maintain order during silent withdrawals. Rear guards composed of the most reliable troops would hold positions to screen the retreat, buying time and maintaining the fiction of continued presence. The main force would withdraw in stages, with units peeling back in sequence while others maintained positions. This methodical approach prevented the panic that could turn an orderly withdrawal into a rout. Night withdrawals offered the best chances for success. Under cover of darkness, Roman armies could abandon positions and gain significant distance before enemies realized they had departed. Campfires might be left burning, and sentries maintained at forward positions while the main body slipped away. By dawn, the army could be miles away, leaving opponents facing empty fortifications. Historical accounts describe instances where Roman commanders successfully extracted entire armies from dangerous situations through silent night movements. These operations demonstrated that the discipline underlying silent warfare could be maintained even under adverse conditions, and that tactical flexibility was as valuable as aggressive capability. The evolution of silent tactics. Through Roman history, Roman use of silence as a tactical tool evolved throughout the Republic and Empire periods. Early Roman warfare, influenced by Greek phalanx tactics, emphasized tight formations and collective shock, where noise and intimidation played important roles. As Roman military practice developed through contact with diverse enemies and exposure to different warfare traditions, silent tactics became more sophisticated and systematically applied. The Punic Wars, particularly the prolonged conflict with Hannibal, taught Romans painful lessons about the value of intelligence, surprise, and unconventional tactics. Hannibal's own use of stealth and ambush influenced Roman tactical thinking. Commanders like Scipio Africanus synthesized lessons from Carthaginian methods with Roman discipline to create more sophisticated approaches. The late Republic period saw further refinement as commanders like Julius Caesar, Pompey, and later Marcus Antonius operated across diverse theaters from Gaul to the Near East. Each region presented unique challenges and opportunities that encouraged tactical innovation. Germanic forests required different silent movement techniques than Gallic plains or Asian mountains. During the Empire period, as Rome shifted from conquest to consolidation and defense, silent tactics evolved to serve different strategic purposes. Border garrison forces developed specialized reconnaissance and patrol techniques, emphasizing stealth over force. Counterinsurgency operations against brigands or rebels often relied on silent approaches to prevent enemies from escaping into familiar terrain. The Dacian Wars under Emperor Trajan showcased the mature form of Roman silent warfare capabilities. Operating in mountainous terrain against a sophisticated enemy who used their own stealth tactics, Roman forces had to match and exceed Dacian capabilities in covert movement. Campaign records describe extensive use of night operations, silent marches through difficult terrain, and coordinated multi-column advances that required precise timing without verbal communication. Cultural memory and literary treatment. Roman use of silence in warfare left lasting impressions on cultural memory and found expression in historical and literary works. Ancient historians like Livy, Polybius, and Tacitus documented specific instances of silent military operations, often emphasizing the discipline and collective will these maneuvers required. These historical accounts served multiple purposes beyond simple record-keeping. They reinforced cultural values about Roman military superiority and discipline. Stories of silent marches and surprise attacks became part of the Roman identity, distinguishing them from barbarian enemies who supposedly lacked such sophisticated capabilities. This cultural narrative served both military recruitment purposes and broader political goals by demonstrating Roman civilization's alleged superiority. The literary treatment of silent warfare also provided instructional value. Later commanders would study historical accounts for tactical lessons and inspiration. The canonical texts of Roman military history became teaching tools, ensuring that knowledge about silent operations passed from generation to generation. Even after specific techniques or circumstances changed, the underlying principles remained relevant. Beyond strictly military literature, Roman poets and philosophers sometimes used military silence as metaphor. The tension between the noise of battle and the silence of stealth became a literary device for exploring themes of civilization and barbarism, reason and passion, control and chaos. These literary treatments further embedded the concept of controlled silence into broader Roman cultural consciousness. Comparative context: silent warfare in other ancient cultures. While this examination focuses on Roman practices, placing them in comparative context illuminates what was uniquely Roman versus common practice in ancient warfare. Many ancient cultures employed stealth and surprise, but the Romans' systematic application of silence across entire armies was distinctive. Greek military tradition, which heavily influenced early Roman practice, certainly valued surprise and recognized the advantage of unexpected attacks. However, Greek warfare generally emphasized the phalanx formation and pitched battles where noise and intimidation played important roles. Silent operations, when they occurred, tended to involve smaller raiding parties rather than movement of main field armies. Persian and other Near Eastern military traditions demonstrated sophisticated understanding of reconnaissance, intelligence gathering, and deception operations. However, the massive, diverse armies characteristic of Persian warfare often lacked the uniform discipline necessary for army-wide silent movements. Persian strength lay more in strategic mobility and logistics than in tactical stealth. Celtic and Germanic tribal warriors who faced Roman armies throughout much of Roman history certainly employed ambush tactics and understood forest warfare. However, tribal military organization typically lacked the hierarchical structure and rigorous training that enabled Roman silent maneuvers. Germanic warriors might successfully ambush smaller Roman forces in familiar territory, but they generally couldn't match Roman capabilities for moving large formations silently across unfamiliar terrain. The Carthaginians under Hannibal demonstrated perhaps the closest approximation to Roman capabilities in this regard. Hannibal's crossing of the Alps and his extensive use of night marches and surprise attacks showed similar appreciation for silent movement's tactical value. This may partly explain why the Punic Wars proved so challenging for Rome and ultimately so influential on Roman tactical development. The decline and legacy of Roman silent warfare. As the Roman Empire evolved and eventually declined, the sophisticated silent warfare capabilities developed over centuries gradually deteriorated. Several factors contributed to this decline, offering insights into the foundations that had enabled these capabilities in the first place. The 3rd century crisis brought profound changes to Roman military organization. As the empire struggled with internal instability, economic decline, and external threats on multiple frontiers, the military became increasingly fragmented. Regional armies under local commanders replaced the unified legionary system. This fragmentation made it harder to maintain the standardized training and shared doctrine that had enabled complex, silent operations. Recruitment patterns changed as well. The earlier system of citizen soldiers with extended service periods gave way to increased reliance on foreign auxiliaries and shorter-term recruits. These forces often lacked the cultural grounding in Roman military tradition and the extended training periods necessary to master silent warfare techniques. While individual units might retain such capabilities, the army-wide proficiency gradually eroded. Economic pressures forced reductions in training time and resources. The elaborate training exercises that had prepared soldiers for silent operations became luxuries that stretched military budgets couldn't always support. Equipment maintenance suffered, making it harder to maintain the specialized gear necessary for silent movement. Tactical evolution also played a role. As Rome increasingly faced mounted nomadic raiders from the steppes and Germanic tribal migrations, warfare evolved toward more mobile, reactive operations. The set-piece battles and deliberate sieges where silent maneuvers had proven so valuable became less common. New tactical problems required different solutions. Yet the legacy of Roman silent warfare persisted. Byzantine military manuals continued to discuss and recommend stealth tactics based on Roman precedents. Medieval European military thinking, to the extent it was systematic at all, drew on Roman examples preserved in classical texts. The fundamental principles that discipline enables silence, silence enables surprise, and surprise provides battlefield advantage, remained valid even as specific techniques evolved. Modern military forces recognize these same principles. Special operations forces worldwide train intensively in silent movement and surprise attacks, applying ancient wisdom with modern technology. The basic human factors that made Roman silent warfare effective remain unchanged. Disciplined soldiers properly trained and equipped can achieve effects far beyond their numbers through surprise, enabled by silence. Conclusion: Roman commanders' use of silence to hide army movements represents a sophisticated application of psychological understanding, tactical innovation, and organizational discipline. Far from being a simple technical trick, silent warfare reflected the deeper characteristics that made Roman military forces so effective. Standardized training, hierarchical organization, technological innovation in service of tactical goals, and above all, the discipline to subordinate individual impulses to collective purpose, the ability to move thousands of armed men through hostile territory without detection required every element of the Roman military system working in concert. It demanded meticulous planning from senior commanders and their staff, effective leadership from centurions and junior officers, technical expertise from engineers and scouts, and absolute discipline from individual soldiers. When these elements aligned, the results could be spectacular, turning potential defeats into victories and enabling strategic achievements that opponents considered impossible. The Roman approach to silent warfare also demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of warfare's psychological dimensions. Romans recognized that surprise attacks succeeded not merely through physical advantage, but through psychological shock. An enemy who saw a Roman army approaching could prepare mentally and physically for battle. An enemy who discovered Roman soldiers already inside their defenses or appearing from an unexpected direction faced not just a tactical problem, but a psychological crisis that could cause immediate collapse of will. Perhaps most significantly, Roman silent warfare capabilities reflected a culture that valued discipline, collective action, and systematic preparation over individual heroics or spontaneous valor. While Roman culture certainly celebrated individual courage and commanders' genius, the silent march of thousands of legionnaires through darkness toward an unsuspecting enemy was fundamentally a collective achievement. It was Roman civilization's capacity for organization and discipline made manifest in military form. This cultural foundation explains both why Roman silent warfare was so effective and why it eventually declined. The capabilities rested not on any one individual's genius or any single technical innovation, but on an entire system of training, organization, and culture. When that system weakened during the empire's decline, the capabilities dependent on it inevitably eroded as well. Yet the principles underlying Roman silent warfare remain valid and influential. Modern militaries still train soldiers to move quietly, still value surprise and deception, still recognize that psychological impact can be as important as physical force. In this sense, Roman commanders who sent their legions through darkness toward unsuspecting enemies over 2,000 years ago continue to influence how warriors think about silence, surprise, and the effective application of military force. The Roman mastery of silence in warfare stands as testament to what disciplined human beings can achieve through systematic training, careful planning, and collective will. It reminds us that the most effective weapons are not always the loudest or most visible, and that sometimes the greatest military achievements come not with a roar, but with silence.